Good
Hi.
morning and welcome to our session today, Flavours from History. Today we're going to delve into the collections and highlight some of the tasty and not so tasty treats that we found. We'll be looking at historic recipes, medical remedy books and menus, among other things. And some of these date back to the 17th century. And then we'll be bringing it right up to date and looking at school dinners, records of school dinners from the 1970s. This is just a small snapshot of what we've got in the collections. There's a lot more to explore if you have an interest in this area. And we'll be putting up some links to the website later on if you would like to do some more exploring of the collections. Learning about historic recipes and cooking historic recipes can tell you so much about the past. It connects us with the past, but also looking at historic ingredients and techniques like pickling and preserving can tell us a lot about reducing food waste, using local sourced ingredients, and also about seasonality. With the recipe books as well, there's you can bear witness to the sort of joy of sharing recipes, treasured recipes with different generations of the family, and also sharing recipes among friends and people that you know. Heather and I had a look at the collections and picked out some food highlights. Things that stood out to us, but also things that showed the breadth of the collections that we have. We then sat down and reported back on what we found. So we're going to play that video for you today, and that should give you a little bit more idea of what we have in the collections.
So to begin, I have been taking a closer look at a copy of Elizabeth Raffles' Experienced English Housekeeper, which we have in our rare book collection. Been learning a bit more about this 18th century Nigella Lawson, and I even had a go at trying out some of her recipes myself.
So do we know much about Elizabeth before she published her book?
Well, we know that she was born in Doncaster in 1733, so that's nearly 290 years ago. She went into service, so she was a servant in a large house at the age of 15. And we have this portrait of her that you can see on your screen at the moment. She took on the position of cook housekeeper at Arley Hall in Cheshire. And it was there that she met and married her husband, John Raffles, and he was the head gardener at Arley Hall.
And when was it she published her book?
So that was in 1769, and it was extremely popular when it was published. It led to Elizabeth being a household name. The book itself is divided into 3 parts. You've got soups, fish, meat pies and puddings, and then sweets and table decorations. And then lastly, pickles, jams and cordials, so fancy juices and medical remedies. And you can see the front page of the Experienced English Housekeeper here.
So Heather, you experimented and you had a bit of a cooking extravaganza. So which recipes did you try?
Well, I was very intrigued by Elizabeth and her story. So one rainy Saturday, I decided to have a raffled recipe marathon, and I attempted 6 bakes from her recipe book. It involved a ridiculous amount of eggs and sugar and cream as well. So you can see my first attempt on the screen at the moment. These are wafer pancakes.
Very impressive.
Thank you. They turned out rather well. And also fried toast, that was a hit as well. It had a lovely flavour from the nutmeg. And they're not too dissimilar from their namesakes that you would cook today if you were to make pancakes or fried toast. The recipe just seems a little different. I also had a go at cheesecakes. So there were bread cheesecakes and rice cheesecakes, and they were okay. They weren't at all like a cheesecake that you would think of for dessert today. One was a little like rice pudding, the other was a little like bread and butter pudding, but both seemed more complicated to make. So yes, they were okay. And then I tried something called common biscuits, even though, as you can see from the screen, they don't really look anything like biscuits. They had quite a pleasant taste, but they were exceedingly dry. That may have been a result of the gluten-free flour that I was using, or it could just be my baking skills. And then lastly, I had an absolute disaster with chocolate puffs. I mean, they seem okay in the picture, but they were a complete disaster. It's completely hollow inside. I don't know what I'd done.
They still look tasty.
They had a very nice aroma, I'll give them that much.
It must be quite tricky to recreate historic recipes. So did you have to make any changes along the way?
Well, as I've mentioned, I use gluten-free flour, and so that was one change I made to Elizabeth's recipe. But what I found really complicated and tricky, even as a relatively experienced baker, was judging the temperatures and timings, because they aren't given in her recipes. She kind of, I guess, assumes that you would know, but also they would be dealing with open fires and ranges. They wouldn't have had the controllable heat that we have in our ovens. So possibly I overbaked some things as a result of that. Also, I mean, in the 18th century, they must have had amazing arm muscles to complete some of these recipes. I was lucky that I could use my electric whisk, as one recipe called for you to beat the eggs for an hour.
An hour? Wow.
I know, I was quite thankful I didn't have to do that. But it shows, you know, the efforts and the physical labour that would have gone into something as relatively straightforward as baking cakes and biscuits. The other thing was equipment. So for the, I think it was for the cheesecakes, it called for petty or patty pans. And it's something I am familiar with. I thought my fairy cake pan would do the job, and it seems to have worked okay. One other thing I would just mention is that one of the recipes called for rose water, which I didn't have, and I didn't have easy access to it. So I hope Elizabeth wouldn't have minded that I used vanilla instead. It tasted quite nice.
I'm sure she'll forgive you. Did you come across any unusual recipes along your?
Yes. I suppose I chose those 6 because they were ones that sounded relatively similar to something I would have an idea of baking. But what I did come across in her book is it's not just cakes, you know, there are savoury recipes as well. There was a range of birds that were eaten at that time that we wouldn't eat now, especially because some of them are rare species in 2021. Things like snipe and woodcock. There was a recipe for rook pie as well. Not sure I fancy that.
No.
But it's not just food, you know. There were drinks, walnut wine. There's a recipe for walnut wine, which was suggested as a remedy for any inward complaints, I guess, like stomachache or something.
Yeah.
Walnut wine, I think that might be quite nice.
Not too bad.
And there was also something that I thought, this sounds like it should be in Harry Potter. It was a recipe called pigeons transmogrified. Transmogrified. So from what I could get from the recipe, the pigeons were stuck inside hollowed out cucumbers with the heads poking out, and then roasted in a lot of wine. Spelling variations as well, actually. Something like spinach, I had to read that sentence twice because it was spelt Spinage, spinach. I suppose it still sounds the same. So Elizabeth suggests to boil it, dry it, and then smother it in butter.
If in doubt, smother butter.
If in doubt, smother in butter or wine, it would seem. We've sort of already mentioned that the recipes do look different from ones we'd be familiar with in cookery books today. So there's no ingredients list at the top. You have to carefully read through the recipe to get an idea of what's going into it. So I had to make sure I did that and that I had all the ingredients that I would need. And we've already mentioned the issues with temperatures and timings as well. So that was a bit tricky.
So her book was very successful at the time, but do we know what happened to Elizabeth later on in life?
Well, from the research I've been doing, she was an incredible businesswoman, and she tried her hand at multiple jobs, multiple businesses, some of which were very successful and sort of forerunners and the first of things as well. Like she created the first trade directory of trades in Manchester.
Okay. She
set up a register office that helped servants and employers find each other for jobs. She ran cookery classes, and from my baking attempts, I'm not sure how I would have fared in one of her cookery classes, but I'm sure it would have been interesting. And she and her husband, they ran a pub, they ran a shop, bringing in some of his gardening expertise. The shop sold seeds and plants, and then also her cookery skills brought in things like cakes and spices and pickles. So she passed away at the age of 48 in 1781, but considering a relatively short life, she accomplished a huge amount. Incredible woman.
A very busy and multi-talented lady.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a little snippet from the local studies collection of an incredible lady. But I'm really interested to see what you've brought from the archives to show us, Kate.
Okay. The first recipe book that I've picked out is the Medical Remedy and Recipe Book of Lady Elizabeth Stanley. This is the front page from the book, and as you can see, she's signed it and she's put the date 1653. It's a little small A5 volume. It really doesn't look very much from the outside, but inside there's lots of recipes, and different generations of the family have contributed different remedies and recipes to the book. And there's lots of different handwriting styles, so that shows that it's been passed down through the family. So it's really a really lovely example.
Oh, well, these medical remedies, they sound very interesting, and actually I came across a few in Elizabeth Raffald's book as well.
They do seem to go hand in hand at that time, that medical remedies are included alongside recipes. I guess because the lady of the manor was responsible for the health of the household, but also for the food that was put on the plate as well. So she would have had a kitchen garden where she'd have grown her medicinal herbs, herbs and plants, which would have been used to cure ailments and treat illness. But also she'd have grown vegetables for eating as well. So in the book, you'll have lots of medical remedies. We've got an example here, a good drink for the pestilence.
Oh, gosh.
But there are plenty of others, how to destroy poison and plague, and a personal favourite, to know whether one shall live or die.
Useful to have.
Yeah.
But I must say, I don't know if it's just me, but it looks quite tricky to read the handwriting. It certainly looks very different from handwriting today. Do you find it quite difficult to read?
Yes, when you first look at it, it is very different, and it's just because they are using different letter shapes to the modern alphabet. Once you've got used to those letter shapes, it is fairly easy to work through.
And what about food recipes? So we were just talking about medical remedies, but you mentioned there were food recipes as well.
Yes, there's some very good food recipes later on in the book. So they give you an idea about what people were eating at the time. So there's popular dishes such as how to grill a calf's head, how to bake an eel pie, how to cook eels, lots of stew involving mutton. And also rabbit as well was quite popular. So as with Raffled, I noticed that there were lots of recipes for birds and birds that you wouldn't expect to find on today's dinner plate.
Definitely.
So you can see from this page there are pigeon recipes for boiling pigeons, roasting pigeons, and also the one at the bottom to roast larks.
Gosh, yes, not quite sure. Different.
Yes, definitely.
And we were also, we were discussing how Elizabeth Raffled's recipes were different to modern recipes, and hearing the examples you've just mentioned, you know, the same is true here with these recipes. Yes.
You can see that there's no ingredient lists with them. It's purely the method of how to do the dish. So a lot is really on the understanding that people have some cooking know-how already. So it's an aid to memory.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
So the second recipe book that I've selected is Madame Eliza Cholmondeley's Remedy and Recipe Book, and it dates back to 1677, which is the reign, all the way back to the reign of James II.
So do you have any favourites from this recipe and remedy book?
Yes, I have selected a couple of recipes. This one that you can see on screen, to preserve oranges my cousin Betty Cholmondeley's way. And she obviously thought a lot of her cousin Betty Cholmondeley, because a lot of recipes appear later on in the book attributed to Betty Cholmondeley. Preserving was obviously a really important part of cooking at the time, and that way they could preserve fruits through the winter. They had no fridges or refrigeration, so it was a really useful tool at the time. Another recipe that I haven't shown you is one for cherry marmalade, and it's actually written as cherry marmalette.
Well, that's an interesting way of spelling marmalade.
Yes, it's not that she couldn't spell. It's just that they tended to write words how they sounded, and it was done phonetically.
It does sound tasty though, cherry marmalade. So apart from the cherry marmalade, what else caught your eye?
So there's also lots of recipes for edible flowers.
Okay.
So they sound very nice as well. So there is a syrup of July flowers.
Gosh, that sounds lovely and summery, sweet and summery.
Yes, and a syrup of damask roses. And they sound lovely and sweet and fragrant syrups. So lots of examples of those. But also an abundance of almond recipes. So
Okay.
I was quite surprised at that. I thought almonds might have been come into this country slightly later, but lots of recipes: almond butter, almond cream, almond cakes, almond jumbles.
Oh, they sound interesting. I quite like the sound of those.
Yes. Delicious.
So that's, I suppose we've talked a lot about 17th and 18th century recipes. And you did mention we've got some later ones as well. If you can mention some of those, that would be great.
Okay. And you can see one of those recipe books here.
I love that cover.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Yes. This is the radiation recipe book, which was given to us with the records of the New World stoves and the Richmond Gas Stoves Company. So it's the 1930s, and in the kitchen, the gas stove has just made its appearance and basically liberated women from the kitchen, decreased cooking times. So it was a real sort of revolution in the kitchen at the time. All the recipes come with a regular gas setting. You get ingredients lists and also the method. So very different from the earlier recipe books.
And looking more like recipe books that we know today.
Definitely, yes. Yeah. The recipes are not the most creative recipes. Things like soused herrings, tripe and onions, Lancashire hot pot, and things like that. So they give you a good idea of the type of food that people were eating at that time.
Yes, I agree. It gives us an idea of what people were eating and what they were cooking, to eat at home as well.
Yes. There's lots of different sources that we have in the collections that give you an idea about food fashions and tastes of the time, including menus. So we've got a menu here from the Golden Grill restaurant in Chester, and that was found amongst some licensing records, so quite unusual.
Yes.
It's the 1950s, 1960s period, and as you can see, again, it's very plain, bland fare compared to nowadays. You've got appetizers, grapefruit cocktail and tomato juice, griddle specialities.
I suppose it's showing us what people at this time were eating, in their leisure time, what they were going to eat out, having meals out rather than at home. There, as you say, quite bland. I'm not sure if I'd go in for their version of an afternoon tea, which is just a cup of tea, bread and butter, jam and a pastry. It's different from afternoon tea today.
I think you'd be a bit disappointed if given that nowadays. Yes. So I guess this is the period where it's people are just beginning to get more disposable income, and going out to eat is still very much a new thing to do. The next one is from the Winnington Works, and it's the engineering department staff dinner.
Okay.
Back in 1903, 1904. And it looks quite exotic when you look at it. As you will see, they've got mock turtle soup, jugged hare, and then 2 types of roast with trimmings, and Christmas pudding.
Well, I did actually, I did come across mock turtle looking through Elizabeth Raffald's book. I personally, I don't know if I would fancy that. And actually, in my head, I've been thinking that all of these, I've been picturing adults eating these recipes, and I don't know if we've got things about that what children would be eating. I don't know if children would go for mock turtle soup, for example.
No, mock turtle soup was a cheaper alternative to the exotic green turtle soup, and used cheaper cuts of meat, like offal, to mimic the texture of turtle meat. So yes, I'm not sure I would like that either. But yes, bringing things even more up to date, I've picked out some school canteen records which give us an idea about school dinners in the 1970s. So the school canteen records are from Leitch Primary School, and what the canteen staff were doing is looking ahead and actually planning out all the ingredients that they needed to buy for the meals, looking ahead. At the end of each page you get the menu for the week. So looking through, I'm struck by the fact that there is a roast dinner on most weeks, with all the trimmings, with cabbage and sprouts.
Oh.
And also fish dishes as well. All quite plain, bland fare, and there's only one choice. Also lots of puddings that I recognise from the 1970s, including rice and prunes, bananas, jelly and blancmange, and also cornflake tart.
What's cornflake tart? Is it literally a tart made out of cornflakes?
It is, yes.
I've never had that.
Sweet pastry with jam and cornflakes, and from memory was quite nice actually.
Actually, yeah, it doesn't sound too bad.
So I've really enjoyed our little journey through the food records in the archives, and I've taken quite a lot from it personally. I really enjoyed looking through the recipe books from the 17th century. I think they're so much more than recipe books. They tell you about food, health at the time, a bit of social history, and also superstition at the time as well. So they were quite fascinating to look through. But there's so much more to look at in the archives, as we mentioned earlier. I also thought the books told you a lot about the way food was eaten at the time. It was very seasonal, and they ate everything that they could find growing around them or they could source locally. And it's quite interesting because we're being encouraged to go back to that nowadays with reducing food miles and reducing carbon footprint. So the cycle's gone all the way around. So what about you, Heather? You must have some interesting things that you'll take away after your cooking experiment.
Yes, definitely. That certainly was a a fun experiment. And I found that by recreating Elizabeth Raffles' recipes, I felt closer to our collection, and it helped bring the 18th century to life for me, what people would be eating and cooking. And I really hope my baking attempts have inspired our viewers to perhaps carry out their own research into food history and maybe try out some recipes themselves as well. Hi again. We're back. Oh, well, we hope that you enjoyed watching our video. We've got about 20 minutes or so that we can chat and comment and answer any questions that people have. So if we've got any coming through. Were historic recipes healthy?
Ooh. That's an interesting one.
Yes, yes. I certainly heard recipes from the UK that had a lot of fresh seasonal produce in.
Yes.
You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
So looking through the historic recipe books, they used a lot of seasonal fruit. So they used barberries, elderberries, figs as well, which are all sort of packed with vitamins. Yep. Figs are full of calcium. So again, probably a lot of healthy things that they were eating in the recipes. And I guess a lot of the things that they were cooking weren't processed as they are nowadays. So they're eating a lot less processed food. So in that sense that they are healthy. In the recipe books, there are a lot of cakes and puddings as well.
Well, yes, I know that from Raffles.
From Raffles.
Yeah, there's a lot of sugar going in, but then they wouldn't have had other preservatives that and additives that would have been going into their food. It would have been made fresh, and yes, there is a lot of sugar and dairy, but it wasn't processed like foods that we get today, perhaps. So yes, it's all fresh, it's all ingredients that they may have grown themselves as well. So there's that added element of, something going from field to plate in a very short space of time as well.
Absolutely, yes. And going back to the sort of barberries, elderberries, packed with vitamins, they were kind of eating superfoods, the superfoods of the day.
Barberries aren't something I've really come across before.
No, they went out of favour quite a bit, so they're not something you come across nowadays at all. So very unusual to come across them. Yeah,
we did come across quite a few ingredients that I'd not heard of before. They've either fallen out of fashion or it's not something that's so easily accessible today.
Yeah. I think I was surprised, though, looking through about how much they could get hold of and source as well.
Yes, because there was a lot of chocolate and sort of citrus fruits and things that I thought you wouldn't perhaps easily get them in 16th, 17th century England.
I suppose there's been lots of trends, like with the empire as well, bringing in a liking for spicy flavors as well. So I know in the recipe books there are some ketchups that crop up quite a lot. So there's recipes for walnut ketchup and mushroom ketchup. And also there is one for Indian pickle as well. So it's showing the influence of the empire and sort of food trends coming in.
Yes, absolutely. So if we've got another question, we'd happily answer it now.
How can I look at some of the records that you mention? Right. Well, certainly we do have some things online, digitized, but a lot of the sources that Kate and I were using are original documents that are at the record office in Chester. So if you are able to make an appointment with us, we have all the details of how to contact us on our website, cheshirearchives.org.uk. So that has details of our opening times, how to make appointments and carry out research. So that would be something that I'd recommend to check out the website. Do you have anything to add, Kate?
No, other than obviously our archives and records are available for people to sort of come and look at in the search room. So they are accessible. If you have an interest in food, then certainly do contact us by email or have a look at our website. There's a catalogue, an online catalogue where you can do a search for particular things you're interested in. And then we, as I say, we have a public search room where you can come in and actually see these records as well.
Great. Another question, if we have one? Do you have any examples of recipes which are traditional to the county of Cheshire? That's a good question. I have come across a few pamphlets and articles in Cheshire Life magazines, which do reference things like savoury cheesecakes that use Cheshire cheese. Obviously, yes. Cheshire is very famous for its cheese, so there are quite a lot of cheese recipes. I came across it was called Old Chester Pudding. See if you like the sound of this. So it contained flour, milk, breadcrumbs, suet, cast sugar, blackcurrant jam, bicarb of soda and salt. So you had to steam it for 3 hours, and then you could have a blackcurrant sauce as an accompaniment. So that was something that was in a Cheshire Life article from a few decades ago. But that sounds quite nice.
It does. Very appealing.
Yeah, a steamed pudding with a sauce. You can't go wrong with that. And also Chester buns. I mean, these are probably things actually that are similar to what you might get throughout different parts of the country, but they've sort of specifically called them a Chester bun, a Chester pudding, and there might be, tweaks to the
like variation.
Depending on where you are in the country. So the Chester buns was something, and a Chester cake, which was quite a simple and economical cake. And that had golden syrup, currants, ground ginger, and any other older, like stale bits of cake. So it's coming back to, food waste and reusing what you had that was still edible, but you were freshening it up, you were using it for other things and using your leftovers. So I found that recipe quite interesting.
I guess we're not so good at that nowadays.
Perhaps not. No, I think if you came across a bit of stale cake now, well, I would put it in my food recycling, perhaps, or bird food, but they're using it as something, they're reusing it as food, which is something I did come across in our research. And then there was another type of Chester pudding, which is thought that is perhaps the origins of a lemon meringue pie. It was something with a ground almond base, and then you were whisking up eggs and lemons to go on top. So you're sort of seeing how recipes evolved over time to what we think of today as a lemon meringue pie. You can see where it perhaps originated.
Been tweaked over time.
Yes, exactly. So they were a few things I came across. I don't know if you found anything in the archives.
Thinking about the historic recipe books, I didn't come across anything specific to Cheshire, but obviously they're using locally sourced fruit and veg, so things that would have grown here. There are a couple of recipes for gooseberries, which I think grow very well in Cheshire.
Cheshire gooseberries.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes, but nothing that you would say is a Cheshire tart, or but lots of locally sourced ingredients. Yes.
So I know from the video that you were particularly taken with the cherry marmalade recipe, but I wanted to ask you, Kate, if you came across any recipes that you really would like to try yourself, because I know I had to go at some raffled recipes.
Yes. With the recipe books, I guess they sound very nice, but the difficulty as you go sort of further back is that, as I was mentioning in the video, they are more an aid to memory.
Yes.
So you don't get an ingredient list. It does just launch into the instructions. So yes, slightly more difficult to follow than the sort of raffled recipes.
That's true, and I did have a few difficulties with these.
Quite a few successes though as well.
Oh, thank you.
Good.
Well, it was so difficult to choose. I mean, I have a sweet tooth, so I knew I was going to try out some baked goods, but there were other things like raspberry fritters or apple fritters, which sounded really nice. So I might have a go at those sometime. And also a recipe for pink pancakes.
Pink pancakes.
How can you make a pancake even better? Make it pink. So she was using juice from beetroot to give it that colour. So it was a natural colouring to make this pink pancake. And we've both talked a lot actually about pickling and preserving. I don't know if you've ever tried it, Kate. I haven't. So
no, I haven't.
So perhaps that's something we should take away from this, to have a go at pickling or preserving something.
Definitely.
I like that idea of, growing something yourself, and if you're not using it straight away, then you are pickling or preserving it. So you're keeping everything, and you're keeping it for later. They're not wasting anything. We keep coming back to that theme.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've still got 5 or 10 minutes. If there's another question or two that we've received, we'll answer that. Are there any resources available for me to carry out food research from home? Yes, we've got quite a few things online. Again, if you'd like to visit our website at cheshirearchives.org.uk, we have links then to our online Cheshire Image Bank, which we have thousands of our visual collection, our photographs and postcards and things digitized, and they're online. So you'd be able to see, I did a search for things relating to food, and there were images of people bilberry picking in Cheshire, images of market gardeners displaying their homegrown rhubarb, perhaps gooseberries as well. But there's a fabulous image of a 19th century wedding cake online as well. I think for the Duchess of Grosvenor. It was made by Bollens of Chester, but it's a fantastic thing. It gives you an idea of sort of cake decorating trends and fashions in the past. So we do have some images of food and food-related activities on the image bank. We've got trade directories that are digitized and are online. So if you were interested in perhaps finding out the name of a particular grocer in your area from 100 years ago, then you can look on our trade directories. Things like confectioners, tea and coffee merchants, they would all be listed as well. We do have lots of things going on to social media. We are on Twitter and we're on Instagram. So follow us on Twitter, we're at Cheshire RO. And then if you would like to follow us on Instagram as well, we are at Cheshire_archives. And on our website, there's a link to our blog as well. I know I wrote one, gosh, it must be a year or two ago now, called Time for Tea. And it was lots of, it was the most fun thing to research and write. It was all about sort of tea time traditions, and Elizabeth Raffald, she featured quite heavily with recipes for macaroons.
Yes.
That was a really nice thing to write, and that's still up on the website.
I know there is one also on a previous food event where we had a live cook-along, as well as a little bit of history of food, which worked very well. And a chef actually recreated a couple of recipes which were inspired by the recipe books. So we had a lovely autumnal stew, which was like a mushroom stew. And then the other one was a cordial, which is very good to give you an energy boost at the start of winter. So that's on the blog as well.
Thank you very, very much for listening and watching us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.